Tonight, we won't stand in battlefields or trace the edges of broken swords. Instead, we'll step inside a small house at the edge of winter, where breath meets fire, and warmth is old enough to be a law. Here, a door bar lifts without words, and cold air drifts in like a tired messenger. A bowl of water waits by the threshold, its surface still enough to remember every traveler who ever leaned close to it. The stranger offers steel by the hilt, and the host moves it aside, not hidden, not forgotten, just far enough to make peace visible. Salt and bread appear like punctuation, a quiet grammar of trust learned over centuries of storms. The fire hums. Chairs speak in small creaks. And outside, the wind learns its manners. Within these walls, every shadow agrees to stay unarmed. For one night, the world is smaller than pride and larger than fear. So lower the lights. Let the sound of wood settling become your heartbeat. And if this old rule, this gentle discipline of safety and fire slows your breathing, that's already enough to belong here. Then the fire's glow settles lower, and what remains is the sound of a room remembering why it was built. Shadows lean inward, slow and polite, the way guests do when they realize they've been welcomed without question. A chair is pulled forward, not for comfort, but for ceremony. Bread waits, salt glints faintly beside it, and the air holds the soft weight of rules older than memory. The threshold has already decided. Weapons sleep by the door tonight, and the house will not speak the language of storms. A wooden bar lowers again, and the room exhales as though it has remembered its own boundaries. The bowl by the door cools, its surface calm enough to mirror the flame, and the salt on the table glows faintly in the firelight. No one speaks loudly. Even silence has its manners here. The guest's blade rests beside the threshold, visible but harmless, like a promise written in clear ink. The storm outside rearranges its voice, and inside, breath settles into rhythm with the crackling wood. This is where the rule lives not in words, but in the pause between them. The night holds its warmth steady, and for a little while, the house becomes a small island where peace can sit down and stay. Bread is broken, not dramatically, just the way crust behaves when it meets two hands that don't want to quarrel. Salt is set by the elbow in a pinch that looks like snow deciding to mind its manners. Water, fire seat, 3 small promises that reach beyond pride. A watcher sits near the door, not to threaten, but to keep the rules steady in case anyone's temper forgets its coat. You may think hospitality is softness, but here it is a kind of firmness that keeps blades asleep. The custom is old enough to have its own footsteps. It walks beside men who would rather count grudges and reminds them there is a limit written into wood and warmed by coals. Under this roof, harm would shame more than it would avenge. The rafters know this. They have overheard more arguments resolve into snoring than into anything sharper. The floorboards are trained to be forgiving. Even the smoke, curling up past the smoke hole, behaves like a reasonable thought that has learned to rise without making a speech. If you want a sleepy fact to carry to the edge of drowsing, in some halls the water bowl stood on a small bench, because benches are good at not forgetting important jobs. Stew arrives before questions, simple and hot, because an empty bowl is a poor place to park curiosity. The horn passes next, rim warmed by hands that have worked all day at something unglamorous like fence posts or the careful management of spoons. The host drinks first, not to claim the night, but to show the path and the limit. Names will come later, after hunger sits down and temper loosens its boots. Salt and bread seal a temporary bond without oaths, just habits, which are the quieter cousins of laws. There's a rhythm to the way spoons move, as if this household has talked with winter for many years and negotiated the terms. Soup first, stories later, secrets at dawn, if absolutely necessary. The Havamal whispers its quiet rules around the room. Eyes keep the door in sight. Ears count the room. Speech is kept shorter than the thought that wanted to be said, because that is what respect looks like when it is comfortable. Praise is modest, thanks exact, and long tailies are folded and put away like spare blankets until morning. The night moves on measured things: warmth, a story, a clean place to lie down, and the soft agreement that everyone will try not to be interesting until daylight. Now and then the talk wanders into detail, the way smoke investigates the corners. Someone quotes a verse about the need to carry a mind that stays awake among strangers, but not so awake that it trips on itself. There is a tiny joke, told slowly, about a man who bragged of his fairness and then kept both halves of a loaf to avoid arguments. The punchline is a glance at the table where the loaf is already shared. Dry humor is the safest kind. It absorbs spills. A small boy is sent to warm the guests' shoes near the hearth, and the room takes note of this not as service but as rehearsal. He will grow and carry the same rules like steady flame from house to house. In a corner, a dog achieves its specialty being a rug with optional wagging, and two cats discuss the treaty of sleeping in alternating chairs. Picture frames are rare here, but memory frames everything. The host's mother taught these motions, and the host's children will teach them again, the way a recipe is remembered by the bowl that prefers a wooden spoon. Sometimes words must be bound more tightly than broth and habit allow, and then the ring by the fire is warmed and set on folded linen. It is a simple circle of metal that believes in remaining a circle, which is a good personality for promises. If a vow is necessary, it keeps to short paths that can be checked at dawn. No one swears to do impossible things under a roof that forbids drama. They promise steps, not journeys, hours, not years. The witness nods at the end of each line, not to approve, but to show that the words were heard. A truce under roof may stretch to the gate the road, or a day's march by consent, and no farther unless both parties decide to adopt a longer peace, the way people adopt a stray cat that keeps showing up precisely at supper time. The ring looks on, unimpressed by tempers, mildly interested in clarity. The gods, who, by any impartial review, enjoy a certain spectacle, agree to watch as neighbors tonight. Even Odin, who appreciates chaos as a learning tool, prefers calm when soup is hot. Of course, the rule can bend in practice without breaking. A guest who lies or steals narrows his own protection to the width of a step. He may still sleep by the fire, because even a liar should not freeze, but his spoon will be counted twice, and his pack will sit where the watcher's hand can learn it by shape. Breaking guest right stains a name longer than wounds would. Neighbors remember, doors stick, markets cool. It is not vengeance that works here, only the slow machinery of reputation, which is more patient and therefore more thorough. The penalty is time doing its quiet work, fewer invitations, colder benches, greetings that choose smaller words. It hurts in exactly the way frost hurts no fight, just firm weather. The law is simple and inhuman in the best sense. Safety kept is honor kept. Safety broken is honor spent. And like any budget, honor tends to feel tighter in winter, when shelter is a coin everyone recognizes. Watch how the household folds the night. Spoons are rinsed in a pan that always squeaks at the same angle, as if loyal to a memory. The horn is brushed with a sprig of juniper and set to dry in a shadow, used for that purpose since before any of these faces acquired wrinkles worth mentioning. Straw is fluffed for the guest, so the floor can behave like a soft argument settled. A spare cloak is given, the one patched with squares from an older cloak that saw more winters than anyone can count. People talk about heroes and battles because those stories travel loud, but the thread that holds the days together is much smaller, a bowl wiped until it shines, a bench that never forgets to stand near the fire. The tiny scrape a knife makes carving away sit from the pot, always careful so the pot does not forget it belongs to this family and not to trouble. Toward dawn, the gifts for the road are arranged with a care that is both economical and generous. Bread for the pouch, still warm because warmth is easier to carry when someone else heats it. A small knife, not a warrior's tool, just the polite kind of blade that believes in cheese, apples, and the idea that cutting rope neatly is a moral good. A wool wrap if the sky is learning to snow again. Directions are spoken twice with landmarks even a weary traveler can trust. A lopsided birch like a man shrugging at the horizon. A stone that looks like a bowl no one claimed. A curve of stream that laughs once and then gets back to work. Steel is returned hilt first, peace carried to the threshold and no farther, because peace under roof is like a lamp brightest where it stands. At the door, the host says the thing hosts always say, walk as if someone loves you enough to watch from the window. Tracks on the frost show 2 sets of prints parting without hurry. The guest does not look back, and the house takes no offense. Roofs understand that gratitude is usually a forward-facing emotion. What does the hearth remember after the latch rests? It remembers names, but only softly, as if the syllables were felt shoes. It keeps a tiny book in the host's mind where lines like, tall farmer from the east with a slow smile, replace signatures. The book smells of smoke and flour and sometimes onion, which is another way to say trustworthy. The bench registers the exact weight where someone slept, and will quietly keep that measurement for a week as if expecting their return. The bowl on the lintel remembers the water that cooled a stranger's face and becomes, for a day, reluctant to be used for anything less ceremonial than washing hands that rebuilt a fence. The ring is laid back on the cloth that likes to hold it. Cloth and ring have the stable friendship of tools that understand one another's purpose without gossip. Guest right lingers as habit, a way a door opens with a hand rather than an arm. A way a voice lowers near the threshold to prepare the air for news and spare it from surprise. If you are drifting, let your mind set a small table the way this house does. Put bread there, the simple, reliable kind that has never auditioned for an epic. Add salt, not pinched, just resting like a pale hell. Place a bowl, empty for now, because empty things are good at welcoming. Imagine a ring that is only a circle and therefore honest about what it can promise. Invent a watcher who is also a neighbor and a chair that remembers being pulled forward in time to help you sit. If you're awake enough to smile, you can leave a review with your ceiling 5 stars for a roof that understood the assignment. If you have already drifted, the roof will accept those stars on your behalf and distribute them evenly to the beams so none of them feel overlooked. The rule that stops bloodshed is not a spell. It is ordinary caution practiced with devotion. It says, a house is a small island where feuds cannot land. If they try, the tide of soup will wash them back to sea. It says, talk while the pot simmers, but tie your words to posts that won't move. It says, a stranger who sleeps by your fire belongs to your quiet until the day is born and decisions can put their boots on properly. These sentences are not exciting. They are reliable, which is rarer, and they taste better with a spoon. Somewhere a verse in the Havamal is pleased with itself for being practical. Somewhere a door remembers the exact feel of a hand that knocks softly because it wanted to be let in rather than applauded. On some nights, the house hosts more than one traveler, and guest right stretches across extra bowls without comment. The rule has a good back. If one guest tells a story about nearly freezing on a ridge, another puts another log on as if logs are good at gratitude. The host's old dog performs its greatest trick, which is falling asleep in a place that announces the evening has no errands left. The fire settles into the embers that keep the room attentive but not ambitious. Someone hums the smallest possible tune, the kind that never got around to asking for lyrics. A child who woke for water falls asleep again halfway through the sip because the cup knows how to lead the way back to pillows. Even Odin, passing by in a cloak that has weather in its creases, peeks in from the road and nods at the arrangement. He could complicate things. He likes experiments in human behavior, but he decides not to. Sober gods appreciate good procedures. Morning comes without trumpet. The light steps indoors the way a neighbor steps into a conversation to ask if anyone needs twine. The gifts for the road wait like patient counselors who will not chase you into trouble, but will gladly accompany you out of it. The host repeats the landmarks slower, as if carving them into the air. The birch that shrugs, the stone bowl, the stream with one laugh. All of this is not ceremony. It is paperwork for safety, signed by steam. The guest lifts the bread, feels the heat that predicts comfort later, and tucks it away like a promise to their future self. They touch the ring's cloth with 2 fingers, the way one thinks a tool without embarrassing it. They shoulder the wool and step into a weather that has been moderately warmed. Behind them, the house rebalances, measuring today's woodpile against today's chores and deciding that both are enough. By midday, the snow has mended the footprints. The bench, free of last night's weight, stands at its post and pretends it never learned about tired backs. The bowl on the lintel returns to its usual duties with a private sense of promotion. The watcher at the door becomes the broom. The broom is honored and tries not to squeak. Outside, the road keeps its usual business-carrying worries in one direction and drying them out in the other. But inside, guest right is still present, stored in the small adjustments furniture makes after kindness. It waits in the way the host sets the next pot slightly earlier than needed, just in case hunger is a punctual visitor. It waits in the folded cloth that likes the feel of warm metal. It waits in the door's skill of opening before knocking grows impatient. You can take this rule with you without needing a hearth or a horn. It works on buses, in waiting rooms, and in late-night kitchens where someone pours cereal into a mixing bowl because all the regular bowls are asleep in the dishwasher. Lay down your sharpness where everyone can see it resting. Offer water, then words. Use names last, once the soup has convinced the tongue to be careful. Keep an invisible ring somewhere nearby, not as a threat, but as a reminder that promises prefer small, measurable shoes. Allow exceptions that protect dignity and penalties that are made of time rather than thunder. When departure comes, pack bread for your future, give directions a second time, and return the day to the world held first. If you forget any step, the house inside you will remember. Houses are good at memory, even temporary ones built from breath. The fire banks itself. The room resumes its everyday posture, which is quietly heroic. Outside, the weather tries on a few ideas and then picks the one it can manage. Inside, spoons line up in a drawer like calm soldiers who have retired to a place where peace is mandatory. The rule does not conclude. It simply continues at a slower speed until the next knock. A draft walks through like a messenger and leaves the door a little wiser. If you are almost asleep, let the last thing you hear be the small ceremony of a bar set gently in its sockets, a safety so ordinary it could be mistaken for furniture. The night keeps its side of the agreement, the house keeps yours. And somewhere on the road, 2 sets of footprints walk, as if they both know the way, because for the length of one warm room, they truly did. You might not expect gold to be quiet, but the oath ring at midnight has a talent for silence so complete that even the braziers seem to warm the air a little more softly when it's lifted from its folded cloth. The hall is not grand. It is careful. Pillars breathe out their stored heat. The long table has been cleared of ordinary noise, and a small lamp waits like a polite moon. The lawkeeper rubs the ring with a piece of linen that has never had an exciting day and will not start tonight. He places a wax tablet on the board and a reed stylus beside it, as if the night intends to take neat notes. Witnesses are counted, drafts are found untamed by shutters, and the floor creaks once in case anyone needed a reminder that wood is alive. Nothing dramatic happens. That is the point. A room becomes a place where words are expected to keep shape. If you find your eyes growing heavy, you can promise to keep listening with half an ear, and I promise to keep the rest of the story at the same comfortable volume. If you fall asleep first, we'll consider that a vote of confidence and mail you a certificate in the morning that says, in very small letters, mission accomplished. Only 3 hands belong here when the ring is raised: the lawkeeper's steady hand, the named witness, and the one who will swear. The ring is lifted no higher than the heart, as if pride is something that should not have to jump to reach its perch. Names are spoken slowly and then written in wax with a stylus that leaves shallow, honest marks useful marks. The sort of marks you can touch later with a finger and feel the truth without needing a poet to explain it. The others stand back, not as an audience, but as the quiet that promises to listen again tomorrow. You can smell the faint, metallic patience of the ring. Gold is famously soft. It prefers confidence to force. The table shifts a fraction, the way tables do when they are remembering to become desks. In this light, even the smoke behaves as if it has read chapter 2 of a book on etiquette. Somewhere in the hall, a dog turns itself once into its ideal shape and concludes it has no administrative responsibilities in this process. It is right. The lawkeeper's voice is the sort that knows where it put its tools. He does not speak about destiny or thunder. He speaks about boundaries, the beginnings and ends of sentences, the proper storage of promises, the way a phrase can be, simple enough to memorize without any embroidery, and strict enough to prevent that embroidery from appearing later by accident. The horn is not necessary tonight, but it sits within reach anyway, as if it had dressed up for a family photo. Breath is measured, not with a ruler, but with the unhurried rhythm of people who need their lungs later for ordinary tasks, like carrying firewood or laughing at the sort of jokes that burn low and last for years. The speaker holds his palm upward to meet the ring, and there's a gently absurd idea. It occurs to me every time that the ring is actually checking the temperature of his honesty like a child's forehead. When a vow begins, each clause receives a full pause to cool. The ring moves slightly, not approving, not judging, but showing it heard. Words are given their walking instructions. Here is the path to the door and the road, and here are the stones you must step on if morning inspects you. The room does not decorate the pledge. No thunderclap is imported. A vow is mainly a practical object, like a well-made spoon, and you can tell whether it will last by how well it fits in the hand. There's always a hidden clause. Every promise carries one like a shadow that says if the words turn false, the ring goes heavy and the road turns narrow. The old people insist they can feel it, that the metal teaches the wrist a little gravity lesson. None of this is mystical. It is just repetition behaving like magic because repetition is patient enough to look like it. The witness writes short phrases on the wax, avoiding explanations that harden guesses. Explanations are for morning, when daylight sweeps the corners and reveals the shoes of every sentence. Now and then, someone asks to promise the moon and is directed gently toward the lantern. It is the law's way to save future embarrassment. What cannot be promised tonight is filed for tomorrow's imagination. A truce under roof may stretch as far as the gate, the road, or a day's march by consent, and when it reaches that edge, it is folded neatly like a sheet that will definitely be needed again. The gods are mentioned, but briefly, as if even they prefer paperwork when the soup is still digesting. Odin's name strolls through the air like a man who enjoys good procedures but has decided not to interfere. Some nights, a short prayer introduces the presence of those currently off duty. Freyr setting a hand on the spring weather, Thor keeping the rafters square, Frigg minding the corners of peace where dust collects and meaning likes to sit. Our modern minds may want to add a receipt number. The stylus scratches one into the wax. It is quite satisfying. If vows have power, they also have price. The price is almost never drama. It is time. A man who breaks his word does not bring a shout. He brings a room that goes quiet when he enters. Chairs migrate slightly away from his favorite place, the way iron filings slide when a magnet changes its mind. Market's cool. Doors become mildly sticky. The The messengers of reputation do not run. They prefer a firm walk that lets them wave to everyone. The village is a kind of memory that cannot be dismissed. It records interest and collects slowly, very slowly, with fewer garnishes and more ledgers than poetry would like. If you are listening with one eye closed, here is the tiny joke. Even gold keeps accounts, though it has the decency to do so without quills. People say the ring weighs more in daylight than at midnight, which is adorable and may be true in the way feelings are true. Accuracy isn't a guess tonight. Usefulness is. In this place, true names are spare and functional. They are like knots that keep focus from tightening too soon. The vow works with roles, epithets, and careful labels the way a workshop organizes its shelves. Nothing is spoken that would harm if overheard. Everything is dated and stored in wax. Power travels more safely when welcomed indirectly, like rain moving through roots. The lawkeeper marks start time, end time, and clear closure rather than spectacle. His performance review would read, excelled at making continuance unnecessary. People shed reputations at the door the way cloaks shed smell. Shame, when it must participate, is kept small and politely wrapped, pointed not at the person, but at a choice that can be unchosen later. To be judged by restraint rather than results is a relief. It means the night will not interrogate you for trophies. It will count the number of careful breaths you managed between sentences and call that progress. There is a comforting bureaucracy to holy things, and this ring is holy in a domestic, practical way. The cloth that holds it is a kind of low-ranking priest. The lawkeeper is not a tyrant, only a custodian. Even the witness is not a judge. He is a neighbor with a good memory who owns a wax tablet and the discipline to file it in the same drawer every time. When the vow is finished, the ring returns to the cloth, which returns to the chest, which returns to its corner, which returns to doing an impression of a small sleepy hill. The bolder gods do their larger work elsewhere, in forests and storms. Here the divine is content to be circular and to approve of clarity. If you're still awake, and I hope you are only barely, imagine being a ring whose task is to make sure promises are small enough to carry to morning. It's a cozy job, good pensions, no travel. Afterward, the room detaches from ceremony and drifts back toward ordinary life, as a harbor drifts back toward being geography. Some chords are kept, some untied, and the reasons are written in wax without adjectives. Knots are noted to be unpicked in water or on a branch. Others are set to sleep in linen until the intention wakes again. Tools are cleaned and put away in the same order so the next day can find them without rummaging. There is a brief, friendly argument about whether the stylus belongs at the left edge of the tablet or the right. It ends with compromise, which is also placed on the shelf. The knight accepts that it has done enough. People do the things people do when a solemn moment is over-asked about winter stores, complain lightly about boots, laugh about a child who swallowed a scholarship of snow and called it delicious. By the time the last lamp sighs toward darkness, the ring is a sleeping idea, and the hall is once again furniture supervising air. Outside, the weather does its quiet arithmetic with stars. Inside, linen folds once, twice around polished gold. The oath is not hidden, the chest is not locked. Only closed because trust prefers to be homely, the kind of expensive that looks like a tool. Witnesses step outside and breathe in the colder air to let the room become a room again. Someone puts an extra log on the brazier because promises like to have something to look at while they cool. The door closes as softly as a good sentence. You can feel the room agree that tomorrow now has a shape. Morning enters like a neighbor who remembers where the cups live. Breakfast is not ceremonial. It is the opposite. A linen thread is knotted, a notch pressed into wax, and the horn taps the table once to seal the night, the way you seal a letter you will eventually send to yourself. The log that burned through the most difficult hour is gently congratulated by the poker. The lockkeeper checks his tablet and reads the short lines without drama to ensure that daylight approves of midnight as handwriting. The promise is not loud. It is precise and therefore is harder to escape. Bread appears. A slice is tucked almost shyly into the traveler's pouch, not because an oath demands it, but because people who sleep under the same beams for a while are entitled to meet again later in a better mood. At the threshold, the speaker spells what will be shared and what will wait for daylight to carry. Directions are spoken twice, once in nouns and once in landmarks. The first version might say, follow the river to the split, take the road north. The second version might say, go to the place where the river mutters like an old friend, and turn where the pine that leans remembers a storm. Walk until the road smells like salt and the ground rings like pans. Both work. The ring remains inside, wrapped and ambitious, because rings, like cats, prefer specific territories. A slow oath likes to be near its shelf. Outside, the air tries on several versions of itself and keeps the one with the smallest wind. Sleepy details continue to collect themselves as if the night were tidying a drawer. The wax tablet is slid into a linen bag that smells faintly of juniper and older decisions. The cloth is folded into eights because quarters are too casual for gold. The braziers are cleaned with care that looks like affection. Someone checks the ash for small, useful nails arranged by accident because a prudent house never underestimates the generosity of fire. Visitors will come later with worries and wool and news. The ring will be waiting without hurry. It is good at waiting. If rings could knit, this one would. The wrist that held the ring remembers the weight for a while after it is gone. That is part of the technology. Somewhere a farmer feeds sheep and finds a rhythm that unconsciously matches the clauses he promised to keep. A carpenter measures a board twice and smiles at the new habit of checking. A woman sewing names into a child is the smallest stitches she knows because she has recently become fond of the kind of neatness that can be reviewed in daylight. What the night has done is not mystical. It is simply a well-run rehearsal. The world prefers rehearsals before performances, and often prefers rehearsals in place of performances entirely. You can run a life on that principle. Many do. There is an odd comfort in knowing that even gods appreciate these routines. Odin, who likes knowledge he once paid the going rate of an eye, understands an agenda. Thor appreciates clear terms. He has hit the wrong thing enough to value labels. Freyr is fond of agreements that favor crops. Frigg recommends tidy corners. Loki is not invited to the meeting, but sends a note complimenting the handwriting. In a decade, no one will recall which knight's vow kept which quarrel from growing its own legs. They will only remember that the scold, handled by steady hands, practiced the art of making tomorrow gentler on everyone's temper. If you are wondering what it feels like to make such a vow, imagine holding a cup that expects to be filled only to a line that is easy to see. The line is generous. You pour to it and you stop. The cup does not complain about your ambition. It simply knows that spilling is expensive and napkins are finite. This is the philosophy of the ring. It asks for less than you fear and exactly as much as you can do twice in boots in weather, with neighbors watching and sympathetic dogs nearby. The best promises are a manageable chore repeated. The way a broom asks to be used in the same direction so the bristles live a long life. If at this point your pulse has slowed to the agreeable pace of a hearth conversation after soup, then yes, the ring approves. It is an excellent sleep aid disguised as policy. Nothing concludes here. Even the goodbye is fashioned for reuse. The lockkeeper returns the stylus to the tablet's pocket, which feels like a habit putting on its coat. The witnesses step out into a morning that has decided to be a little brighter than necessary. Somewhere a small boy copies the ring circle on a scrap of wood and discovers that drawing in loops is restful. Somewhere a woman ties bread in cloth and reconsiders a quarrel she will now let burn down slowly like sensible fire. The traveler on the road touches the nut of bread in his pouch and tastes, with pleasant surprise, the exact amount of cinnamon the house always uses when it wants to wish someone well without saying so aloud. The ring sleeps again. The chest paces its breathing with the house. The braziers pet their own coals. A draft wanders through the shutter and sits politely in a corner, waiting to be noticed and redirected. All of this goes on whether anyone watches or not, because order does not require applause. It thrives on repetition, on the kind of attention you can apply while thinking about other humane things, like whether a new roof truss deserves a blessing or whether there is enough salt to see the winter through. If you're still awake, feel free to nod once in the ring's direction. If you're already gone, your nod has been recorded anyway. That is the other talent of gold at midnight. It keeps excellent minutes so you don't have to. And so we drift the way a vow drifts toward morning, not finished, only resting. The ring knows where it lives, the wax knows where it waits, the people know where to set their voices down when they need both hands for living. The world outside has weather, which is its profession, and geese, who gossip professionally, and roads, which prefer non-dramatic feet. The room is exactly what it was when we arrived, only calmer, which is a trick good rooms learn. Somewhere a log shifts and remembers to be tree-shaped. Somewhere a promise rehearses itself once, the words stepping quietly from the cloth of memory, taking their places like patient actors, and then lying down again before the audience even arrives. You might not expect a wooden bowl of water to be a doorman, but in old houses it waited by the threshold like a quiet official, asking steel to drink and cool its temper before it crossed. The rule was not a spell, and it did not require a priest, only a swept floor, a fire that had remembered its job, and a seat pulled forward without a word. Guest right was so unassuming that travelers often met at first as furniture. A stranger would offer a weapon by the hilt. The host would nod and place it out of reach, but still in sight, and even the weather seemed to take a step back. The room did not turn magical. It turned practical. Hands were rinsed, a cloak was shaken dry, and warmth was given before questions. The hush that followed was not dramatic. It was the ordinary silence of people agreeing to be less interesting and more decent for a little while. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you may feel free to subscribe to the tradition of not stabbing anyone who has given you a chair. It's a low-cost membership with excellent benefits. Bread was broken and salt set near the elbow, which is the culinary way of saying, we plan to speak like neighbors and not like wolves. The salt was not a symbol so much as a tool. A pinch on the tongue steadied speech. It kept the mouth from running faster than wisdom. Water, fire, and a seat were counted as protection. An injury inside a roofing of beams would shame more than it avenged. Some houses appointed a watcher by the door, not a guard with grand ambitions, just someone whose hobby was order. His work was to keep small promises from tripping on large tempers. For that night, the house became a small island where feud could not land. Storms tapped on the shutters like nosy cousins and were ignored. If you think of the rule as a blanket, it fit everyone who would sit still, which is not everyone, but enough. The first bowl was always served before the first question, because stew knows how to keep the tongue calm while the mind looks for better words. The host tasted first, partly to prove the food was safe, partly to set the pace. A sip, a breath, a slower sentence, this was the rhythm that turned strangers into guests, and guests into temporary kin. Names could wait until hunger softened the edges of travel. Under the rafters, a horn might pass with beer or watered mead, not to push courage into foolishness, but to let bodies remember that care and warmth had arrived. The Havamal, which liked its advice sturdy and compact, encouraged eyes to keep the door in sight and ears to count the room, and for speech to end much sooner than thought. Praise was modest, thanks exact, and secrets restored until morning when light could supervise them. Hospitality dressed like kindness, but it was also a kind of local law that kept blades asleep. Because rules are most useful when they are boring, guess right had many small behaviors and almost no flourishes. A damp cloak was never hung so close to the fire that it would steam up tempers. Boots were pointed toward the door not to suggest leaving, but to remind everyone that the world remained larger than any one house. If a guest had a dog, the dog learned the policy faster than its owner. Lie by the hearth, watch the door, make friends with flour. Children carried the bowls because children have a talent for putting soup in front of trouble and causing trouble to reconsider its schedule. A second bowl was an invitation to ask one question, and a slice of bread folded across the palm was permission to answer without beginning a speech. When vows needed binding, even under a roof, people used the oath ring warmed by the fire, but guest right usually preferred lighter equipment. It preferred a look, a nod, a sentence that could be quoted at breakfast. The edges of the rule were known and respected because every rule has edges where the wind can get in. If blood had already been spilled, guest right could be refused, but it was more common for host to say yes and then set a boundary in the simplest grammar. You will sleep by the hearth and leave at dawn. You may eat from the third pot, but not from the second, because the second is for the house. You may tell one story for every story you hear. You may ask where the sheep have gone, but you may not ask why they're hiding their names. This sounds fussy, which is exactly why it works. Fussiness loves peace. The trouble with honorable ideas is that they must walk in boots. A guest who lied or stole narrowed his own protection to the width of a single step. Breaking guest right stained a name longer than most wounds would, because neighbors are really archivists who have disguised themselves as people. Doors that once swung open would stick. Markets would cool by a degree noticeable, mainly to people who count coppers by temperature. The penalty for treachery was not thunder. It was time doing its slow work very publicly. In some places, if the rule was bent and then snapped, the pathway of safety shrank from the house to the threshold, and from the threshold to the width of the doorstep. If a man could balance on that board, he could not be harmed until he moved. The law was simple and very specific. Safety kept was honor kept. Safety broken was honor spent and could only be earned back with years, which are famously expensive. I liked the small kindness that came last in the night, when the fire was banked and the bar set gently across the door. The guests lay down on the bench near the hearth where a house always remembers the people who have slept there. Most houses kept that memory in the same place they kept their good knives, accessible but respectful. If the night was clear, someone might step outside and make sure the stars had not decided to fall. They rarely did. There was also a low, practical prayer. May the roof hold. May the soup last. May the dog not find the stew unsupervised. May the guest choose a sensible time to vanish like a fog that knows its job. In the morning, the bench would be brushed, the bowl rinsed, and if the guest had sworn anything besides gratitude, a witness would repeat it softly toward the rafters so that the rafters could nod and go back to counting winter. Gifts were expected to be small and useful. A house might send a traveler off with a piece of bread wrapped in cloth, a sprig of herbs that thought highly of digestion, and a little knife that didn't mind losing its edge on string or bark. Directions were spoken twice, once in the grand language of compass points, and once in the practical language of landmarks. Go where the river braids like a patient woman's hair. Turn when the bent pine pretends to be a question, and leave the road when the old rock has decided to look like a sleeping whale. The refusal to mention distances and hours was a mercy. Time behaves differently when you're cold, and there is no legislation that can force a mile to fit a clock without protest. At the door, the host would return steel, hilt first, not as a reward, but as a reminder. The blade had been a guest too, and it had learned to behave. Now it could travel with that memory. Steps would appear on the frost, showing two sets of prints briefly parting without hurry. The rule did not demand gratitude out loud. It preferred the evidence of behavior, fewer quarrels, more repaired fences, the occasional loaf left on a doorstep that did not ask for comments. The house went on tidying itself. The host folded the cloth that had seen the knife, then poured a little water on the threshold so the door would remember being a river once and choose to flow for easy comings and goings. Not every hearth could hold guest right unshaken. Some stories describe fierce winters of famine when hospitality shrank to a cup of thin broth, a corner of the floor, and the hope that spring would arrive with sufficient modesty. Even then the form remained. The bowl arrived before the news. The watcher kept his seat, and whoever entered did not leave worse than he came. In summer, the rule grew generous hips. A guest was sometimes given a small task as proof of welcome. Hold the baby so it remembers what strangers are for. Turn the cheese. Sing the boring song that keeps the goats from imagining drama. Help mend a rope while the old stories are told again without edits. These were not chores in the disciplinary sense. They were relaxed ceremonies disguised as practicalities. The longer you held the child, the more everyone trusted you to remember your own childhood, and thus to behave like a well-raised adult. Because humans like an exception, guess right found room for one. If an enemy chased a man into a house under this rule, the enemy could not enter with harm in mind, but he could sit on the other side of the room and glare into his own bowl of soup. The two would eat within the same safety and practice the difficult art of chewing while planning nothing heroic. In some halls, the host would seat them on either side of the fire so the heat did the glaring for them. It is hard to hate while one's socks steam into friendliness. The gods approved mostly. Thor was pleased because nothing was being smashed indoors. Freyr, who had interests in crops and favorable weather, liked arrangements that kept blood inside bodies. Odin leaned in occasionally, interested in the complicated thought experiment of a law that owes its success to boredom. Loki found it amusing, and because he found it amusing, he had to be watched extra carefully, which everyone did, and thus he was also bored. This counts as a victory. By morning, anger has usually become less motivated. People think slow thoughts beside embers and decide to postpone heroism until after laundry. The host repeats the directions for the road and hands over a token for the pouch, bread, the knife, a small wool wrap. Nothing is engraved. The items will be used and wear down without ceremony, which is how memory likes to travel in surfaces that become smooth with touch. The ring goes back on its lintel cloth if it has traveled down to attend any words in the night. Its work returns to being heavy and circular, which is another way of saying patient. Names go into a small book or into the kind of talk that travels just as well. Some houses kept a record like a weather log. Snow, north wind, guests from the valley, bowl returned clean, peace intact. It's mundane and therefore intimate. The world outside continues at its sensible speed. Tradesmen gossip with the restraint of people who intend to use their breath later. A woman at the well exchanges recipes for keeping broth from sulking. Children argue about whether goats can count to 3. The goats decline to comment. Messengers pass with news weighted in practical details rather than adjectives. Farms make their little calculations. Hay to animals, silver to merchants, kind words to the people who might be needed at a short notice to pull a cart out of a ditch. The rule of the hearth has no jurisdiction over the universe, but it governs the square floor that most needs governing, the part directly beneath the ladle. Sometimes a weary god is said to have visited in disguise and tested the rule. The stories are vague about which god. It is a useful vagueness that allows any god to feel properly inspected. The deity receives stew without fanfare, listens to small worries about weather and small joys about calves with reasonable ears, accepts a place by the fire without requesting a throne, and leaves a household slightly better at being a household. This is holiness as maintenance. It is the sacred as a kind of reliable housekeeping. Floors swept, bowls washed, stories trimmed of their sharpest edges so they do not snag on sleep. If you are measuring your wakefulness, this is a good place to lose track. We can be honest, the rule is not thrilling. It was not designed to be. It was designed to push excitement out to the road where it belongs, to keep the house from becoming a theater. When a neighbor came by at dusk with a face full of difficult news, the room rearranged itself by habit. The dog took the corner with the least ambition. Someone added water to the pot, which is the oldest arithmetic in the world, and the watcher checked the door with the same care he would give a new hinge. Talk came in small pieces. Anger got measured against bread, which is an unfair fight for anger because bread is persistent and smells nicer. Eventually, weariness won, and plans that had been dramatic in the yard agreed to be sensible in the lamplight. There is a final, modest enchantment to mention. When a guest rose to leave at first light and the house doors breathed open the path the traveler took off in, touch the gate, the road, or a day's march by consent, but the important part is that footprints did not begin in trouble. They began in warmth. The house did not require O's from the feet. It trusted muscle memory. The door closed behind without complaint, and the hearth settled into its silent profession of being the center of a small world. You could set your life by such centers the way sailors set their course by stars. Not because stars are dramatic, but because they show up. If you find yourself drifting, let the room continue for you. Someone is still there turning a log, so it burns the long way. Someone is refolding a cloth that will soon forget it ever had creases. Someone is murmuring the weather to a window to keep it calm. Guess rate will have another dull, successful evening and then another. In a season, you will hear that two neighbors who had every reason to argue found themselves laughing at a mutual goat. In a year, no one will be able to say precisely which bowl of stew stopped which quarrel. They will only recall that a rule as gentle as warm light kept the night quiet, and the house satisfied with its craft will hold that quiet like a cup holds water steady ordinary, just right for the next tired traveler who needs to set down a burden, breathe twice, and learn once more how to be human in a room. You might not expect a wooden bowl of water to be the most important person at a party, but at an old Norse doorway, it was, in a very quiet way, the one in charge. It waited on a low bench just inside the threshold, patient as a moonlit puddle, reminding steel to cool its temper and remember its manners. The door bar lifted, winter air sighed across a fire that had been practicing a small orange glow all afternoon, and a seat was pulled forward without a word. A stranger came in carrying the road on his shoulders, which is to say mud, a little weather, and a habit of looking sideways. He offered his weapon by the hilt as the rule required. The host nodded and set the blade out of reach, but not out of sight the way one might put a lively cat on the far end of the shelf. Hands were rinsed, a cloak was shaken dry, warmth was given before questions. The room did not become sacred. It became sensible. If you find yourself still awake 2 minutes from now, feel free to become a subscriber to this very old policy of chairs first, arguments much later. The terms are generous and the cancellation policy is simply going to bed. Bread and salt appeared close to the guest's elbow, a little island of trust that reached past pride. The bread was ordinary, which made it perfect, because ordinary is how peace likes to travel. Salt pricked the tongue and steadied it the way a hand on a railing steadies the feet. Water, seat, and fire counted as protection. Injury under a roof would shame more than it avenged. Even feuds that had put on armor and dramatic speeches took off their boots here and agreed to behave until morning. A watcher sat near the door with the pleasant authority of a neighbor who knows where the spoons live. He did not glower. He tended the boundary like someone picking lint from a sleeve. The house shrank the world down to a clear square of floor and a dependable table. Outside, the wind was having opinions about the moon. Inside, talk tested the temperature, then settled to warm. The first bowl arrived before the first question because Stu is better at diplomacy than most people. The guest's tongue learned calm while the mind searched for better words. The host drank first, both to prove that dinner was not a trap and to set the pace: sip, breath, sentence, repeat. The horn might follow with mead or ale thin to friendly, not saga, strength. Names could wait until hunger had filed its edges. It is difficult to pronounce an enemy while chewing. The Havimol, that sturdy manual of practical wisdom, preferred short talk to long thought, and always let the door remain in the eye's corner. Secrets stayed clothed until morning so the sun could supervise them. Praise kept itself tidy. Thanks did not try to form a parade. Hospitality looked like kindness, but it behaved like a small and very local law, designed to keep blades asleep and stories pleasant. Sensible houses collected little habits the way beaches collect shells. Cloaks never steamed so close to the fire that tempers softened and then grew odd shapes. Boots pointed toward the door, not because anyone was being pushed out, but because a house that remembers the road is a house that forgives tiredness. If the traveler kept a dog, the dog learned the rule faster than the man. Lie by the hearth. Approve of everyone, pilfer nothing larger than a smile. Children carried bowls the way priests carry fonts, gravity in each step. Soup very determined to stay inside its own circle. A second bowl permitted one question. A folded slice of bread licensed a short answer. The watcher coughed gently if an answer considered sprinting. The fire listened with the patience of old fires, which is a lot. When vows had to be made, and sometimes they did, because roads tangle the way yarn does, the oath ring was warmed by the fire and laid on folded cloth. But in a night of guest-right vows were shy. Mostly the ring watched the stew go by, fat like a tidy moon, and minded its own heavy business. Promises preferred to be small and precise, like nails that hold a roof in a wind without announcing themselves. If blood had recently been spilled, and a feud sat outside like weather that had learned to walk, the rule could still be offered. The host would speak the boundary in a grammar everybody understood. Here you will eat, there you will sleep, at dawn you will go. Ask for bread freely, ask for secrets never. Ask for directions twice. The rule loved its fussiness. Fussiness keeps peace the way a tight lid keeps soup from inventing its own geography. The great virtue of guess right was that it was boring. Boring is very powerful. When a guest lied or stole, the protection narrowed until it fit only the width of a doorstep. A man might stand on that board as on a little island whose tides were measured in patience. He could not be struck while he balanced there, but neither could he lie down, and the longest story in the world is the one made out of minutes. Breaking the rules stained a name longer than wounds would. Neighbors, who were archivists disguised as people with chores, remembered. Doors that once swung open learned to stick. Markets developed a faint draft when that person entered. The penalty was time doing its slow work in broad daylight, which is a famously meticulous clerk. It is pleasant to imagine the small kindnesses that come after the last bowl, when the fire is banked and the room sinks into a steady hush. The guest stretches on the bench near the hearth. Houses remember people who have slept there the way a pillow remembers a face and exaggerates only a little. Someone steps outside and checks that the stars are still where the stars prefer to be, which is mostly above things and slightly amused. A quiet prayer is given to the rafters. May the roof hold, may the spoon find the bottom of the pot kindly. May the dog not discover new career goals at midnight. May the guest stay asleep while thinking the best thoughts anyone ever had about blankets. At first light, the bench is brushed, the bowl rinsed, and if any promises were spoken, the witness repeats them in a voice pitched to suit rafters with gentle opinions. Nothing is dramatic, everything is tidy, mourning is a craft. A small gift is made for the road, a heel of bread and a bit of cloth, a sprig of something green with digestive ambitions, a little knife that believes in string more than in heroism. Directions are given twice, once with compass points and once with landmarks, as if the land itself wanted to sign its instructions. Follow the river when it braids like patient hair. Turn where the pine asks a question. Leave the road when the stone that looks like a sleeping whale seems slightly embarrassed to be noticed. Hours are never promised because time is an unreliable witness, particularly in cold weather. Better to offer the traveler a sentence that knows the landscape than a number that doesn't. Steel is returned hilt first at the door, as if the blade too had been a guest and learned to behave. Footprints part in the frost without hurry. The host closes the door gently so the house will remember its profession. The rule requests no official gratitude. It prefers evidence. The evidence appears in repaired fences, and gossip that cannot find anything exciting to say, and loaves discovered on doorsteps with no visible author. Inside, the cloth that had seen the knife is folded. A little water is poured on the threshold so the doorway can enjoy the memory of being a river once. The watcher stretches, becomes just a neighbor again, and goes to inspect the roof, which is how neighbors conclude most epics. There were exceptions, clean and careful ones. If an enemy chased someone under a roof and then followed, the enemy was allowed to sit in the same room, provided both adopted the manner of people who have agreed to borrow their best behavior from future versions of themselves. Sometimes the host put them on either side of the fire so the heat did the glaring for them. They ate. Soup is not interested in feuds. Bread refuses to associate with knives unless butter is present to mediate. Nothing eternal was solved. The important part was to postpone grand gestures until socks were dry. The gods, hearing of these arrangements, approved in their various ways. Thor enjoyed an evening without indoor damage. Freyr, patron of crops, nodded to anything that kept blood on the inside where circulation can be properly admired. Odin stayed because thought experiments are a hobby of his. A law that survives by being technical and dull delighted him. Loki found the rule amusing, which is the most dangerous kind of approval, but even he half-liked a night off from inventing surprise. When the rule bent, which is to say when human beings perform their reliable trick of being human, the repair was practical. A liar's safety shrank. A thief's reputation developed a cold edge, but guess right did not turn the house into a courtroom. It preferred a justice measured in teaspoons. A door would open slower for a season. Trades would require exact change, not because silver is exciting, but because trust had gone to polish its boots. Children were told a story about the time Uncle So-and-so forgot how to behave and then remembered again. After 6 harvests and an extravagant number of apologies disguised as chores. The law was simple, even when it was stern. Safety kept is honor kept. Safety broken is honor spent and repayable at the slow rate favored by calendars. The house kept memory the way a good chest keeps winter clothes, airing them out at useful moments, never waving them in anyone's face. Names might go into a small book or into talk that traveled just as effectively, because a community is a magnificent engine for transporting information at the speed of chores. A line might read, "Snow, north wind, guest from the valley. Bull returned clean, nothing broken. Good story about a cow that thought it was a log." Memory at this scale is the opposite of judgment. It is a method for keeping peace reachable. When another traveler knocked, the door remembered how to behave, and so did the floor and the chairs and the blankets and the ladle. There is something reassuring about furniture that has ethics. Because nights are long in winter and stories dislike idleness, people told the simple history of the rule, while the pot settled itself. Long before kings had shields with personality, long before a written law dressed itself in ink, the threshold learned to be a small country with a predictable climate. It admitted weather but not war, hunger but not theft, news but not boasting. When travelers crossed the sill, they did so at the pace of people entering a memory. They put down burdens the way geese put down feathers and were surprised at how well the floor took the weight. They described the road in the language of streams and fences, and appreciated how breath tastes different when it is in racing. Sometimes a disguised deity visited a favorite rumor, testing the scene where politeness becomes principle. The god was served without ceremony, listened to news about hay and weather as if agriculture had just been invented and required immediate praise, and left a blessing shaped like better habits. This holiness was not spectacular, it was maintenance. Floors swept, bowls washed, timbers folded neatly and put away for later. If you are measuring your wakefulness, this is an excellent point at which to lose count. The fire shifts its shoulders. The watcher's chair says a small creak that means still here. Outside, a fox has an appointment with moonlight and arrives exactly on time. The rule's miracle was that it asked almost nothing and returned quite a lot. Villages that honor it get fewer songs, perhaps, but more harvests. Sagas prefer glitter. Bread prefers ovens. In a generous summer, the house might even find work for its guest. Please hold the baby so the baby acquires an early fondness for strangers who smell of road. Please turn the cheese while we pretend to debate whether goats can count to 3. Please tell the story of the bridge that refuses to collapse while rope is being braided nearby. These are chores as ritual. Ceremony is disguised as useful fidgeting. They give hands a task while peace settles into the corners like well-behaved dust. When departure came, the traveler bowed a little to the bowl of water, because gratitude is often a sideways thing. He tied the small gift at his belt, felt the wool wrap announce that future evenings would forgive him for being a person who sometimes wants warmth, and stepped out into the road that behaves differently for those who have slept indoors. Behind, the door spoke its comfortable wooden language. A sigh, a soft thud, a simple agreement to be a wall again. The house did not discover loneliness, it discovered routine. The fire had earned an afternoon of slow thoughts. The floor admired its own cleanliness. The dog resumed an important project called nothing in particular. If you are drifting now, that is all right. The rule will keep working without supervision. A stranger will lift the latch and find the same bench, the same water, the same small faith in ordinary behavior. Voices will move in the narrow band that makes understanding easy and disagreement unambitious. Someone will repeat directions as if the road were a recipe. Someone will tuck the ring back into its folded cloth, heavy with a job it did not have to do tonight. Peace will continue to look like furniture and feel like bread. The season will change several times. Neighbors will remember what deserves remembering and forget the rest out of kindness or laziness, which are sometimes the same virtue with different hats. And later, perhaps much later, no one will be able to say exactly which bowl of stew persuaded which quarrel to fall asleep. They will only remark that the nights were quiet, that the door had a nice way of closing, and that somewhere near the threshold, a small wooden bowl did the study work of a diplomat while pretending to be merely water. You might not expect a wooden bowl of water to be the most influential resident of a Viking house, yet there it waits on a low bench by the door, still as a moon caught in a ladle, quietly in charge. The door bar lifts. Winter air strolls in like a guest who forgot to knock. The fire clears its throat in the hearth. A traveler steps over the raised sill and pauses exactly where all old stories like to pause on the threshold, where a person is half road, half room. No one rushes the moment. The stranger offers steel by the hilt, not the blade, and the host nods with a practiced economy that says both welcome and we prefer our furniture without new holes. A hand, brisk and calm, sets the weapon just out of reach, but still where it can see the conversation. Hands are rinsed in the bowl with a sound like small rain meeting patience. Cloak shaken, boots scraped, hat held respectfully as if listening. The seat nearest the fire is drawn forward without speech. Warmth is given before questions, which feels like the right order for most things. If you're somehow still awake in a few minutes, you can subscribe to this policy, It costs only the price of a deep breath and is guaranteed to outlast most modern warranties. The room is a measured geometry of peace. There is the hearth like a red thought, a bench with shoulders, a table that believes in elbows. The host's household moves in a quiet braid, a log added, a ladle raised, a cat deciding to supervise everyone fairly. Nothing ceremonial occurs. The sensible becomes sacred by repetition. Bread and a pinch of salt settle near the traveler's elbow as if they have their own feet. This small offering is older than the house and taller than pride. A watcher sits nearer the door than the fire, not to glare, but to tend the edge so that the edge behaves. He is a neighbor who has achieved the rank of chair guardian. His task is to keep storm at the threshold, whether the storm is made of weather or temper. It is understood that under this roof, even feuds must hang their helmets on a peg and practice, being merely cold people who could use a bowl of something hot. The house, just for tonight, becomes a small island where swords forget the vocabulary for argument. Stu arrives first, because Stu is wiser than conversation when meeting a stranger. The guest leans over the bowl and the steam tells a short story about onions and patience. The host tastes first, which announces two things: that the pot is honest and that the pace of the evening will be gentle. A horn passes with ale or mead, thinned to a policy of moderation. It wants to be interesting, not heroic. The spoon makes its slow circuit and the tongue learns calm, giving the mind time to find better words. Names have not yet been asked. Names, like cats, are easier to meet after dinner. One question may be allowed after the second spoonful. Not where have you come from, which is complicated, but how is the road, which has a shorter answer and fewer opinions. The rule in the Havamal prefers this order of operations. Doors should be kept in sight because doors make promises and promises like to be witnessed. Speech should be shorter than thought. Secrets can wait until morning because sunlight is an excellent editor. Praise should be tidy. Thanks should fit in one hand. Hospitality is not a soft thing here. It is a neat rectangle of law you can set a bowl on. The house collects habits the way beaches collect smooth stones. Cloaks steam at a respectful distance, far enough that stories do not melt into argument. Boots point toward the door because the house remembers the world beyond it and respects the road that carried this body here. If the traveler has a dog, the dog learns that guess right is a game where everyone pretends not to notice it, napping in the best patch of warmth. Children carry bowls with the solemnity of priests, processing with a thumb-sized moon. News is handled as taxpayers handle forms, carefully, without speculation, and with a good pen. First the river is passable, later the rumor about cousins. Never the other way around. The watcher by the door coughs softly if a sentence begins to sprint. Firelight keeps the pace of a slowly blinking eye. If silence visits, nobody hurries it out. Silence is a paying customer dot. Sometimes the oath ring observes the evening from a folded piece of linen by the hearth. Warm as a little sun that decided to become circular and helpful. Tonight it has no job. The guest right, by design, enjoys making oaths unemployed. Nevertheless, the ring remains available, like a notary public who enjoys the soup. If something must be promised, it will be done sparingly and in clauses so brief, even the soot can memorize them. The night does not invite drama. It invites accuracy. If a quarrel stands outside sharpening itself on the wind, the house answers with spoons, not swords. The rule does not forgive everything, but it delays many things until they shrink to the size of napkins and can be folded away. On long winter nights, there is a particular power to boredom. Boredom is peace that has learned to sit dot if the rule bends, and people have always been accomplished at bending rules as if they were. Read baskets, then the edges contract. A guest who lies or steals discovers that the zone of protection narrows to the width of a doorstep plank. He may stand there in safety while the community takes its time learning how to look at him again. This is both merciful and inconvenient, which is how you know it is old law. Breaking guest rights stains a name longer than a wound, because neighbors are genius archivists disguised as people with errands. Doors that once opened cheerfully develop a thoughtful stiffness. Market stalls prefer exact change instead of stories. The penalty is not spectacular. Time performs it slowly in daylight, where everyone can assist by continuing with chores. The lesson is simple enough to embroider on a towel. Safety kept is honor kept. Safety broken is honor spent and repayable in seasons, not moments. The ring, if used, is heavy, but often the heaviest thing is a glance that remembers. The talking tonight has a soft blend of humor on it, the kind that collects on wool when people don't argue. A tale about the cow that insisted on standing on the new bridge, as if critical to its structural integrity. A complaint about the wind, which has once again learned new gossip from the mountains and refuses to keep it to itself. There is a practical debate about whether goats can count to 3. The experts agree they count to enough, which is select mathematics. The guest offers trade news as if unwrapping a parcel. The ferry rope mended, the good millstone cracked, a peddler who sells needles that disapprove of thread. Even the cat contributes by being an example of perfect nonviolence, except to yarn. If you are keeping score of your wakefulness, this is an excellent place to misplace the pencil, when the bowls are rinsed and lean to dry at an angle that potters approve of. The room drifts toward the good side of midnight where thoughts are round and rolling. The guest lies near the hearth. Sleep lowers like a gentle helmet. The house keeps watch the way an old tree keeps shade without effort or commentary. Someone steps out to notice that the sky has more stars than an honest inventory can count. A simple prayer is offered to the rafters. Let the roof hold, let the bread rise. Let the dog dream only of rabbits that obey the speed limit. The watcher at the door keeps being a person whose talent is simply staying. Morning will arrive on its own. It likes to be unannounced, like a relative who is delightful only in small doses. At daybreak, the room measures itself and finds everything exactly where it was promised. The bench where sleep happened is brushed, not because sleep leaves crumbs, but because brushing tells the bench it did good work. A small gift is made for the road as if the road were a further guest to be honored, bread wrapped in a corner of clean cloth. A slice of dried fish with admirable opinions on salt. A wool cord that can tie either a bundle or a brief piece. Directions are given twice: first with windrose precision, second with landmarks friendly enough to shake hands. Follow the river until it braids like well-behaved hair. Turn where the pine stands like a question mark. Leave the path where the stone that resembles a sleeping whale seems slightly embarrassed to be noticed. Hours are not guaranteed because time is notorious for freelancing, especially in winter. Steel is returned hilt first, as if even the sword has learned manners overnight. Footprints part in the frost without hurry. 4 lines if the dog has opinions about escort duty. The door closes in a tone of wood that means we'll be here again later rather than we are finished. If there were any vows, the ring on its linen towel witnesses them once more in a voice made of metal and quiet heat. The house does not proceed to feel impressive. It proceeds to sweep. Heroic civilizations often underestimate sweeping. The law that kept the night safe requires a morning that launders the spoons. Even gods, when they visited in ragged cloaks, were respectfully included in the washing up. Memory is an invisible clerk who keeps perfect ledgers in a messy desk. Names may go into a small book with dates like reliable fence posts, or they may travel by mouth, which is the older highway. That traveler from the valley, polite elbows, paid with a good story about a bridge and a cow, someone will say later while turning cheese. If there was trouble, it will be described the way winter is, accurately and without applause. The point of the tale is always the rule, not the personalities. A house that remembers how to be kind can make kindness a habit rather than a performance. The watchman becomes a neighbor again. The bowl of water on the bench resumes its moon impersonation. The fire practices being orange. Because the custom is older than memory, people sometimes argue about its inventor. Some say it was a frostbitten winter that taught the rule, because survival likes company. Others say a goddess of fields whispered it, because bread renders murder inconvenient. Odin might have suggested the loopholes. He collects loopholes the way ravens collect shiny opinions. Thor approved because he enjoys an evening without indoor thunder. Loki pretended boredom while checking every corner for mischief and finding none. The beauty of Guess Right is that it lacks spectacle. It dislikes being painted on shields. A law that is mostly furniture and soup is difficult to sing, which is why sagas give it only brief verses and leave the rest to lived practice. There are exceptions, carefully tended like lamps in a wind. If an enemy follows a fleeing man to a door and both arrive panting at the sill, the host may permit both to sit within sight of each other so the fire can do the glaring. They will eat with identical spoons and identical restraints. The rule is not blind. It is farsighted. It allows enemies to share warmth in order to give tomorrow a chance to be less dramatic. Under roof, even hate is required to whisper. It is astonishing how much quieter hate becomes when chewing. The watchman coughs exactly as often as necessary. If a sentence reaches for its sword, a ladle interrupts it. Night is a slow teacher, but it is consistent. We should mention the door itself, which is the rule's favorite student. The sill is slightly high so that feet learn humility as they cross. The lintel has stories carved into it that no one reads straight through. One only notices a fish here, a knot there, a small ship forever reaching shore. In summer, the door stands open like a shepherd watching. In winter, it is a strong cheek turned against the wind. The door knows that inside is a promise, and a promise is an agreement between time and behavior. If you have ever stepped into a house that remembered you, you have felt the door's opinion. Welcome back to the same good ordinary. There is bread, there is soup, there is a chair. The rest can be organized later. When a breach happens, the mending is craft work. A thief returns the taken thing, and also a season of small help stacking wood. Mending nets, being the early person who keeps the fire from feeling lonely. Reputation is made of many threads. Guess Right draws a new one through the torn place again and again until fabric looks like itself. People are washable, the law suggests, with enough time and a mild soap of consequences. There are, of course, sorrier cases. Even then, the door remembers how to stay closed without slamming. It prefers determined wood to clever locks. Locks are excellent, just not as ancient. When the guest has gone out along the morning road, the house resumes its slow choreography. Someone puts the ring back into its folded towel and tucks both into the chest that smells of smoke and certainty. Someone feeds the fire a polite log with the quiet dignity of two old friends who have agreed not to discuss politics. Someone strokes the dog and receives the dog's comprehensive report on the state of the world, which is 90% naps. The lives going on here would bore a poet who wants sword music, but they would delight a field. Fields prefer dependable boredom. Crops sleep all winter counting spoons dot if somehow you are still listening. You may notice that sleep has been sneaking closer with stock-footed steps. That is the side effect of rules that take their time. The house hums the small song of grain sacks. The bowl of water, which began the evening as a minor moon, has evaporated only a little and is pleased with its work. The door stands like a sentence that ends with a period, not an exclamation point. On a shelf, a cup is drying. It does not plan to be heroic. The law of guess right remains awake even as everyone yawns. Not because it needs vigilance, but because it enjoys existing the way tables enjoy being horizontal. Another traveler will come on another cold night and pause with 1 foot on the threshold and 1 foot on the road. The house will do what it has practiced for centuries. It will make space, pour warmth, and let words choose the slower path toward meaning. Nothing concludes. Peace is an ongoing chore, and happily, chores are endless. You might not expect a metal circle to coach an entire room into calm, but the oath ring at midnight does exactly that. It sits on folded linen like a small sun pretending to nap, radiating nothing louder than good manners. Lamps make honeyed ovals on the planks. The braziers exhale soft heat that likes the ankles first and the rest of a person later. Someone has brushed the table so carefully that the wood grain looks as if it remembered every year it grew. A clerk of the law checks a wax tablet the way a baker checks a loaf fondly, but also with standards. Doors are set against drafts, benches are drawn up in angles that make listening easy, and a cat has been gently persuaded to choose any spot that is not the ring's pillow. The hall is not performing. It is simply prepared, the way a good bed is neither dramatic nor theoretical. If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to follow this channel for other thrilling topics like why important objects prefer linen. Or don't. The ring will never know. Not many hands touch the ring. That is one of its tricks. The lawkeeper has the right, and the named witness, and the person who intends to promise something sturdy enough to outlast a kettle. Everyone else keeps a respectful orbit, which also keeps the ring from becoming smudged by good intentions. When the moment approaches, the ring is lifted no higher than the heart. This is less religious than ergonomic and quietly wise. Pride does not climb that high tonight. It can wait outside with the horses. Words at the ring are simple enough to be copied accurately by memory, which is convenient because memory is the main stationery available to most centuries. A stylus waits nearby in case something must be written into wax, a practical arrangement that allows the promise to have both breath and handwriting. The room knows its roll walls to hold in warmth, air to carry a voice, and people to keep still so that meaning can settle. The way snow settles on roofs without denting them. The ceremony is not a ceremony so much as a deliberate pace. The horn passes, not for bravado, but because a little ale or mead informs the voice that it lives in a body with breath. The palm meets gold, and for a moment the mind feels the mind's own weight return, as if sitting firmly in a chair after hovering indecisively nearby. The phrases are bare of embroidery. They are cut to an honest length so they can be remembered by the person who has to keep them later, which is the same person who spoke them now. The ring likes that symmetry. Each clause is offered its own pause, long enough for the metal to cool a fraction, for heat to leave and accuracy to arrive. The witness nods at the end of each line, not approving, not judging, only indicating that the words pass through the air successfully, like a ship that cleared the harbor stones with inches to spare. Every promise keeps a small shadow for honesty's sake. A hidden clause that says, "And if I fail, this is what I will do to make the story truthful again." The law dislikes melodrama. It prefers repair manuals. The shadow might pledge a fine measured in daylight, labor, or a season of errands, or a public apology with the same posture as chopping wood. Threats do not speak here. The price lives in the simple leave of reputation, and in doors that will remain pleasantly open if the promise does not turn out to be a traveling liar. A short prayer may ask the gods to remember this moment when the speaker is tempted by later afternoons. The gods are usually pleased to be asked for clerical help. They do not intervene with thunder. They write in the same sturdy punctuation as the law. There is an odd serenity to the ring itself. It has no hinges and gives no advice, but it shapes what can be said in its presence. People discover that time slows at a reasonable rate, like thick honey going downhill. Nobody rushes. The room seems to enlarge in a quiet way, as if the beams were stretching politely to make space for this new piece of language. Even the cat, who earlier had many opinions, falls into a pretense of sleep that fools nobody and pleases everyone. In this gentle progress, the ring may be the only object that never yawns. A name, once spoken touching gold, tightens focus in an almost medicinal way. The promise must therefore work with roles, epithets, and particular tasks rather than sprawling across all of life like a blanket that keeps tripping the feet. A vow made with too large a spoon has been known to slop everywhere at the first bump in the road. The law prefers a teaspoon. Nothing harsh is written into the wax, only words that would not embarrass a person who found the tablet later while tidying a chest. Dates are added with diligence because dates are the shoe sizes of time, unexciting but critical if you want to want properly. Power, the Haldensis, moves best when it is welcomed indirectly, rain finding soil through thatch, warmth traveling from fire through cup to fingers. A boast cannot be sworn here. It becomes shy and goes back outside, which is healthy for boasts. A boundary is set around the vow start time, end time. Clear closure, because stories that never stop usually forget what they were about. The ring, like a good teacher, dislikes extra credit for its own sake. People will talk. This is the most reliable force in the 9 worlds besides gravity, and the desire of goats to explore horizontal surfaces. The Hall understands that its restraint will be judged louder than its results, and it makes peace with that. Reputation, shame, and power are not punishments so much as the weather a person travels through after promising. They are not always stormy. Many days are clear and bright and pleasantly boring, which is the favorite climate of lawful conduct. Odin, who has an appetite for the odd and the complicated, watches with that single outward-facing eye and the many inward-facing ones that all chiefs develop. When they learn that gossip can bend spears without touching them, Thor, who prefers a straightforward hammer conversation, appreciates rooms where nothing tips over. Freya likes any gathering that treats names as pearls to be threaded carefully, not tossed on a board with dice. Loki attends when he is bored, only to discover that secrecy is better at this craft than trickery. He makes a note and pretends he did not. There's no shouting in the oath. The law of Ning, the kind that stains a person with whispering mockery, receives attention as necessary, but never noise. A ring-sworn promise that breaks can awaken public ridicule, which is more tiring than any duel, and requires many dull hours of being seen fetching water. Seats slide subtly away by the length of a finger when a liar arrives, not unkindly, just with mathematics. Errands return without being asked. This is not cruelty. It is discipline performed by a village with excellent posture. The ring does not punish. It witnesses while time does its slow work. If you imagine the consequence as a spring thaw trickles, drips slush, then clear water and perhaps a very clean yard, you will not be far wrong. When gods are named as witnesses, they are invited not as thunder or sea or perfect beauty, but as aspects of steadiness. Freyr's sense of peace, Thor's stubborn fairness, Odin's memory that holds both compliments and receipts. A promise sworn to the ring belongs first to a god's table and only then to a chieftain's chest. The order matters, like adding water to porridge rather than porridge to water. Swearing is a way of asking the world to regard a sentence as furniture that cannot be moved without consulting the floor. Even the most grand person speaks softer when they learn how many listeners a promise has. Ravens in the rafters tilt their heads and memorize names for future reference, which is both flattering and a little unnerving. After the vow, life does what life excels at continuing. A small linen thread is knotted with a neatness that would have pleased a seamstress in any century. If the promise concerns a task, a note is pressed into wax. The horn taps the table once to announce that midnight has been gently turned into tomorrow. The ring cools and is wrapped, not hidden, because it is ordinary again and should be stored like good cookware, not jewels. Witnesses find their shoes by practiced memory and breathe the colder air of the doorway as if to remind their lungs which world they belong to, the world in which talk carries weight and weight is measured by days. Nothing has changed to the eye. The cat is still occupying exactly the space. A human intended to sit, but tomorrow now has a shape. The ring enjoys being asleep in cloth, which is, for metals, a kind of dreaming morning tricks the wax. This is done at first light when facts are in the mood to be facts. The stylus reveals a line that always seems shorter than the speaker remembers, and therefore easier to obey. Reversible steps are chosen when available. Norse law is ancient but not cruel, and likes doors that work in both directions. At the threshold, a brief oath belongs to the same family as washing hands, saying grace, and putting a tool back where it belongs. None of these actions are heroic. That is the point. The practical things form the floor on which the grand things can pace, without falling through into the cellar. If a promise falters, the hall does not change its voice. Corrections arrive like rain that was predicted and respected. Steady, sleeves rolled, no scolding necessary. One works the due fines, sort of a household budget for regret, and one carries water for a neighbor's cows, even if the cows insist on evaluating one's personality. People who love gossip are fed with small bits of accuracy and are happier than if they were left to eat rumor alone, which upsets the stomach. In this way, the oath ring acts after the fact, encouraging repair by merely continuing to exist and look a little disappointed. Like a skillet that hates being left wet. There are, as in any recipe, exceptions with their own calm choreography. If the vow concerns a feud and the ring has thought a portion of it, the truce may be stretched like dough over an extra day's march, or to the gate, or to a specific boulder that all parties agree looks like a sleeping bear. Everyone appreciates precise choreography for peace. The hidden clause works especially well here, allowing people to leave dignity folded neatly by the hearth rather than spilling it on the path where it can be stepped in. No one is humiliated. That is the secret. Humiliation wakes drama. The ring prefers data. Small digressions creep in, pleasant as crumbs after a cake. Someone reports that a certain farmer, renowned for caution, swore to stop naming his goats after kings. It was confusing during roll call. Another says the blacksmith's new apprentice vowed to keep a forge fire alive for a full season and, predictably, has fallen in love with the part of the night when iron cools to the same color as thought. A traveler swears only to speak the first version of a rumor and not the second or third, which are famously more attractive but significantly less true. Even debates about weather are conducted with scientific dignity. This snow, we agree, is the patient kind. It arrives with paperwork. A vow is a small architecture. It is beams and pegs, a roof and a threshold. The ring is the quiet foreman. When a person reaches for the metal, they discover in their palm a slight coolness, as if holding a coin that has traveled farther than money usually does. The skin knows it is being asked to remember. Later, at work, the memory behaves like a polite supervisor. It does not shout. It does not stare. It simply exists in the room, and tools straighten themselves. You may wonder, as the night leans toward its softer edge, why there is such ceremony for words. The answer is that words are the only tools allowed to start fires and put them out. The Vikings, who spent a lot of time being misunderstood by the future, were extremely interested in eliminating drafty promises. A drafty promise lets in weather at inconvenient angles. The oath ring plugs the gap, not by magic, but by insisting that the mouth and the hand agree. Once, a boy tried to swear with enthusiasm only, his fingers an inch from the metal. Everyone saw the inch. They smiled and gave him a cup and told him to try again after a little calm. The second time he touched the ring and said less. That is how vows like to be born: touch first, talk second, just enough syllables to be handled safely. The ring's favorite human behavior, if it could be said to have favorites, is the small, non-heroic correction. The person who returns to the hall a week later to say, I promised the fence by moon's turn, but the ground was stone and my pick was moodier than expected. I will finish by 2 more dawns, and who then does so? The hall hums with approval at this, like a hive noticing a good flower. The witness nods, the stylist adds a sensible note. The cat yawns professionally, and the ring goes on sleeping in its fold as if pleased to supervise such reasonable creatures. There are rarely nights when the ring must listen to grief, a vow for the future made because someone did not arrive from the past. Those words are not dramatic either. They are lists disguised as prayers. I will feed the animals on time. I will keep the latch mended. I will speak their name as if it were a candle. I will try not to make big decisions while hungry. The ring seems to warm a little for those, though that may be the person's hand. In any case, the law knows that sorrow is another kind of promise that prefers routine. Routine, like linen, holds the shape of care. Should you be nodding now? Eyes heavier than iron that has decided to be a plow? The ring does not mind. It likes witnesses, but it adores sleepers. Sleepers prove the hall is safe, and a safe hall is the only place where people dare to be precise. The clerk rests the stylus. The lamp trims itself in a competent way. Outside, the winter street is a single line of quiet. Somewhere a raven tells its partner that the legal news is interesting tonight, which is raven for nothing burned down. If you remain awake in a corner of your mind, imagine the ring cooling by degrees so small that a mathematician would become fond of them. Within an hour, it will be the same temperature as the room, which is also what vows try to achieve: no longer a hot opinion, simply the weather of a life. We can remain here for as long as the braziers are steady, and they are very steady. The lockkeeper gathers up the ring with the same carefulness he would give a sleeping child or dangerously full cup of cream. The linen folds once, twice, as if remembering a dance. The chest accepts its weight with a little wooden sigh that is really just the room letting go of effort. Some promises will walk out into the snow and become useful before breakfast. Others will wait like seeds until spring tells them how to behave. None of them require applause. They require hands, and hands are plentiful. What remains after the hall empties is the quiet architecture of having set something on purpose. You could live an entire season on that feeling if you were frugal. You could mend a quarrel with it, or a fence, or the habit of putting off repairs until they bring friends. You could, if nothing else, sleep well beside it. The ring does not insist on conclusions. It is content with good beginnings and middles that continue. The night settles into the seam of the building like a message tucked into a sleeve. Somewhere a watcher bars the door, not with drama, but with the old wooden logic that keeps wind out and promises in. The last coal thinks in a red whisper. The room grows a little darker and never less sure. And like all things made of patience, it could go on like this, softly precise, almost forever. You might not think a doorway could teach adults how to breathe, but the old door of a northern house takes that job very seriously. It opens a little, letting in a puff of winter that smells like iron and the idea of pine, and then it waits. The threshold, polished by boots and years and the occasional nervous sock, watches both sides like a very calm referee. A stranger arrives with trouble still sticking to his cloak, and the host comes forward with the sort of nod that means you can rest exactly as far as this sill. Weapons are handled like troublesome relatives at a wedding, acknowledged, escorted, and placed somewhere visible but unable to speak. A bowl of water waits by the fire for travel dry hands, and a seat is tugged away from the draft toward the hush of the hearth. No speeches, no toasts, no doucet. The rules have done their stretching before everyone arrived. They are already limber and warm. If you're still awake in a minute or two, feel free to follow the series. If you're not, the door will close softly, and we'll file that under success inside. Heat makes a quiet border around everyone's ribs, and the storm is persuaded to stay outside, the way a polite dog is persuaded to leave the laundry alone. The host offers what seems like very little: a crust, some salt, a place to rest elbows. It turns out that very little includes the entire concept of not dying tonight. Bread knows most languages. Salt whispers the rest. A watcher sits near the door for form's sake, as if the house has borrowed one of its own posts to keep the rules steady. This is not a guard so much as a reminder that the night has agreed to put on slippers. For the length of the darkness, the roof is a small island surrounded by everything that cannot land here. Arguments with sharp edges, debts that bite, oaths that chafe. The island holds. Everyone lets their breath find the pace of the fire, which is the house's heartbeat anyway. The stranger can feel his back unclench one vertebra at a time. Pride is offended and asks to see the manager. The manager is the bread, and the bread is firm but kind. The first bowl arrives before the first question, and this is genius disguised as soup. Steam trains the tongue to be reasonable. A wooden spoon is an excellent diplomat. It engages the mouth before the mouth can form a dangerous sentence. The horn passes after, not to convert anyone into an ideas champion, only to remind the voice that it is attached to a body with warmth. The hot drink finds whatever has turned to small stones inside the traveler and dissolves it to a comfortable slurry. Names can wait. Facts can cool. Nobody is expected to be an interesting person before the stew has done its administrative work. The host notices things and does nothing about them yet. The frayed strap, the uneven wear on the shoe, the way a person glances at the closed window as if listening. These are notes for later in the night when conversation is strong enough to walk on its own. For now, the house prefers quiet competence. It has a story to tell how people were safer in rooms than in plans. There are rules here that enjoy not being recited. The Havimol has pages for hosts and guests, but this house carries its copy folded into habits rather than spoken aloud. Keep the door in sight, it remembers, because doors teach humility. Keep the speech shorter than the thought, because a room is not a meadow. It has walls to bounce things back. Keep secrets until morning, because everything is dramatic at night and most of it gets boring with breakfast, and boring is what we want. Praise is to be used lightly, like a good oil, and thanks are to be said as if thankfulness isn't a performance but a function. Hospitality is not softness. It is order wearing a blanket. Even the cat, draped over the nearest ambition, understands that hospitality is a geometry problem. Put people at angles that soften the lines between them. The house remains aware of the knives tucked away, the spears leaning where they cannot reach, but it is equally aware of how bowls and open palms and the angle of the shoulder can make still sleepy. It is almost priestly, but without incense and with more crumbs. The fire likes being witness to sensible things. It warms bread edges and leaves the middle to steam in its own thoughts. The house keeps noise like a librarian keeps books, accessible but with rules about borrowing. Under this peace, reputations sit down and behave. A boast knows it will be escorted outside if it tries to strut. An insult gets offered stew until it forgets what it came to say. The stranger observes that the watcher by the door is not watching him so much as watching the rule itself, like a shepherd who trusts the flock more than the hill. He realizes that even if he wished to break the law of hospitality, he would have to wrestle an entire room, a tradition, a braided cord of old stories and new gossip. And nobody wins a wrestling match with a room. Rooms are patient athletes. Sometimes a vow is necessary even within this easy truce. If words have to be bound tonight, the oath ring sleeps by the fire on linen, and someone warms it with their palm the way one warms a seal in winter. But most of the time, the house prefers lighter agreements, the kind that do not require gods to sit up and take minutes. If feelings are more complicated, the talk promises only to continue at dawn when arithmetic is more trustworthy. This is the indoor version of mercy, letting decisions nap until they are useful. The hidden clause, every promise has one, is simple too. If I fail, I will do something measurable with my time, not with my excuses. The ring is pleased to be unnecessary. It is like a retired fisherman who still gives advice about knots, but prefers soup to Stormsdott when guess right is broken, and it is. Because people are creative, that breakage does not come with trumpets. It makes a smaller sound, a hin sigh followed by the quiet of neighbors making notes. The offender discovers that the world narrows to the width of a step. His protection shrinks to what he can carry in his hands without dropping. Doors remember him and don't open as wide. Markets remember him and make arithmetic heavy. Stories remember him and go looking for a better main character. The law does not set itself on fire. It cools, and cooling can be colder than rage. This is the architecture of consequence. A man spends his coin of honor and discovers that the exchange rate is not favorable and the bank is extremely patient. The worst punishment is boredom. A liar is simply left alone with his own explanations until he becomes tired of listening to them and volunteers for repair. The village prefers errands to rage. Rage ends in a long afternoon. Errands, at least, produce milk. There are edges to the rule. If someone arrives with a feud in both hands, the house can only widen so far. The watcher will set terms with the resistance of a heavy table. If you must swear, swear you will reach the gate before you take up your argument again. Swear you will keep weapons quiet for a day's march along the road. Swear by the ring that you will walk separately on the left side of the ditch, while the other walks on the right. 2 lines like good handwriting. People who would like to be brave see these terms and realize that brave and careful are cousins who share a coat. The truth stretches like leather. It cannot be pulled to the horizon, but it can be pulled to the bridge. And the bridge is a respectable distance to do nothing dangerous. Gifts for the road have their own household ritual. Nothing too grand, because grand things forget how to be used. A slice of bread for the pouch, a small knife for honesty. We have all known problems that were merely stubborn packaging. Perhaps a wool wrap, which is like being told politely to keep living. Directions are given twice, as if the first set were for pride and the second were for the actual feat. Landmarks are chosen for memory's convenience, the rock shaped like a sleeping ox. The bend where the ash tree leans the way old men lean to hear better. The creak that sounds like someone working at a whetstone. Steel is returned by the hilt first. A borrowed blade is grateful to go home and will use that feeling to cut better later. At the threshold, the host speaks the kind of words that are not really language, more like helpful weather, slow snow of reassurance, a drift of good wishes over the boots. Tracks on frost show 2 sets of prints parting without hurry, and the house imagines them like branches on a diagram of what could have been and what will be. The map loves forks. What the hearth remembers, it remembers without writing. Names go into conversation the way pebbles go into shoes. They travel anyway, but they travel more memorably. The bench will be brushed, the bowl rinsed, the ring tucked into its folded bed. The watcher will now be a doer of small work, because nights that go well end in chores. Guest right lingers as a habit. The door will be open the same way tomorrow to the same exact width. The greeting will take the same amount of time that pouring water takes, and the roll will sit down again with its back against the same beam. This is how customs get strong. They eat porridge. They wear reasonable boots. It is pleasant at this hour to imagine the rule cleaning its spectacles and reading its own diary. It finds mostly entries like kept everyone alive by being born again, or refused to permit poetic arguments. Allowed stew instead. Laws that boast too much burnout. Laws that harness the day's natural sleepiness remain fresh. Even the gods seem fond of this one. Thor places a friendly thumb on the roof to keep it snug during a gust. Freyr sends a sense of peace like a low fog that leaves everything damp with calm. Odin, who appreciates the cleverness of not needing more cleverness, stores the house's name among the good addresses. Loki appears once in a long while, impatient for chaos, and discovers that everyone is quietly busy, and there is absolutely nothing to set on fire that would be interesting. He borrows a spoon and leaves Dot. Of course, the rule has a mischievous cousin, hospitality that tries to be a stage show. Everyone is stuck up too late with jokes, the meat is salty with bragging, and the guest goes to sleep both exhausted and oddly unhelped. This house does not know that cousin. This house keeps itself like a well-ordered drawer, a place for knives, a place for cups, a secret place for the letter that somebody hasn't decided to send. The guest learns the schedule as if it were already his. When to fetch wood, when to carry water, where to put boots, so they are not the evening's main character. Service is the only tax accepted here, and there is no audit dot at some point in the night. The conversation will lean into the quiet places and talk about weather in a tone that suggests weather is a person everyone knows. Snow has personalities, they agree. There's the lazy kind, the politely early kind, and the kind that arrives late with opinions. Ice is the same, sometimes a luthier, sometimes a locksmith. These assessments are not crucial, but they steady the tongue that wishes to wander into old injuries. By the time tempers might have woken, they discover the hour has tipped toward the side of sleep that forgives more than it remembers. The house somehow always has enough blankets. It is unclear whether the blankets multiply when the lamps go out, or whether generosity folds them into larger shapes in the long run. Guess right is how a scattered world knits itself into something resembling this sweater. Fields do not connect on their own. They prefer isolation because hedges are proud. Houses connect them by being places where travelers carry useful rumors, which is to say, news cooled to a temperature where it can be touched. The rule functions like the quietest post office, stamping each story with an origin and a destination and a suggestion of caution. When the snows are heavy, people carry those stories with the same care as eggs. Eggs are less delicate than stories, but both prefer a steady hand and a predictable road. Sometimes a breach has to be mended in public, which is everyone's least favorite style of craft. The offender brings back the thing he took, or the pride he ate, or the story he bent. He stands on the threshold so everyone can see he is smaller than the house and that he knows it. The host does a very advanced trick that has no special name. He accepts the return without collapsing into triumph. He makes it seem as if the rule did the work, and he was merely there to hold the bowl. Onlookers nod the way people nod when a wheel goes back on a cart. Another day will be drivable now. A few stray details prefer to be collected while the room grows sleepy. The bowl near the door is always wooden, not because metal is wrong, but because wood tells the truth about temperature. It will not lie that the water is warm when the room is cold. The spoon that matched the bowl has a notch from someone's tooth who learned not to talk while tasting. The bench closest to the fire is set at an angle that allows a man to pretend he is not watching the door while absolutely watching the door. The cat. There is always a cat operates the night watch for arrogance, padding over to sit on anyone who looks capable of forgetting the rule. This is a surprisingly effective program, and soon the room slips toward its quietest draft. The stranger's ankle, which protested all day, has come to an agreement with the rest of his leg. The host's shoulders have released the extra effort people carry when they suspect the evening might turn loud. The watcher is only a shape by the door now, a person-shaped reminder that promises can be as simple as not doing the wrong thing. If you are still listening, soft at the edges, the next part of the night is made of small chores accomplished slowly, embers banked with the care of folding a letter, bowls turned over for drying, a last check of the latch out of habit rather than fear. Guest rate sits like an extra blanket, not heavy but present. The storm noses the eaves and acknowledges governance. Somewhere a traveler speaks into the straw, not to a person, but to the rule itself. A thank you that is also a permission to sleep. And it could stay this way, calmly, with the door remembering how to keep the world in two gentle halves. For as long as the coals carry their red idea into morning, and longer still if someone adds a little wood with the same careful hands. You might not think anyone has to count apples for the gods, but someone does, and of course it's Idun. She keeps them in a cool room that feels like the inside of a thoughtful sleeve. The door to her cellar is small on purpose, so warm air has to sigh before it enters. Shelves are rubbed with beeswax and a little pine smoke, so everything smells like a promise that includes forests. Each apple rests in its own nest of fleece, not fancy, just kind. The way you would set a cup on a coaster because the table is a relative. A chalk line on the floor marks where baskets wait their turn. Eventime waits its turn here. She works at night because night behaves. The torches burn low, and a window the size of a book lets in starlight as if the sky were eavesdropping. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can stay to hear how divine produce is managed. If you drift off, Idun will keep counting without you and will not be offended. Her inventory system is almost too sensible. She tallies apples by texture before color, because color can make a personality choice under torchlight. Firmness doesn't lie. Each apple gets a soft tap near the stem, and it answers with a quiet little drum that tells her whether the inside is still thinking like a tree. She has names for the sounds: hollow like a horn, safe like a spoon, proud like a shield. If an apple answers with a sound like an old boot stepping in snow, it goes to the stew shelf still honored, just redirected. There is a ledger on the wall, a slab of slate bordered by braid marks where Bragi touched it and thought briefly about rhyming. Idun writes in a tiny hand that looks like pebbles at the edge of a stream. She doesn't use ink. She uses chalk made from bones of fish that jumped at the wrong moment and therefore help with immortality indirectly. She draws a small star next to any fruit likely to be borrowed by Odin, because he claims he can tell when one has been saved for him, which is true only if the star is especially large. The shelves are arranged by the idea of seasons rather than by the real seasons, which is more practical than it sounds at 2 a.m. Early apples sit near the door where they can leave quickly and be eaten on steps and stairways. Late apples do their thinking against the far wall, where the stone is colder and patient. She keeps a narrow shelf halfway up for small apples that tried their best. They are valuable in recipes that want concentration rather than elegance, the way some ideas work better on a small page. When Thor visits, he pretends to choose at random and then somehow picks the very apple that wanted a thunderstorm anyway. When Frigg visits, she selects 2 and puts them into a linen pouch that looks like a cloud thinking about knitting. For the Norns, Idun sets out whatever wishes to be part of a knife-clean argument. They take one each without looking as if a choice has occurred, which is their hobby. Light humor aside, there are procedures. Apples that have traveled to difficult places are quarantined on the long table until their stories calm down. An apple carried through hell will want to tell you things. It will not rot faster, but it will change its mind about sweetness. Idun listens with her palm. If the skin feels like a letter pressed very hard, she moves the fruit to the shelf labeled moral lessons. The gods pretend not to eat from that shelf, which is adorable. Every apple receives a small rune on its straw nest, not to mark the apple, but to reassure the straw that it belongs in a sacred job. The rune means stay, which is the best word a seller knows. She also tucks a piece of dried mint under each cloth, because mint knows how to make coolness behave. There is no hurry. Immortality does not like to be rushed. It wrinkles. She checks the vents that lead to Nibelheim's polite side. The air that comes through those stone throats is crisp and slightly dramatic, like someone who wears good wool even when no one is looking. She sets a feather by each opening as a small gauge. If they shiver, the air is right. If they lie still, she knocks on the wall and asks the mountain to remember its part in this. Stones appreciate being consulted. A simple rope runs from the ceiling to the floor with knots tied at hand widths. This is her measure of night. She does not count hours, just knots. It is easier to befriend a knot than to debate a clock. Clocks hold grudges. Knots are social creatures. Bragi, who has been married to Idun long enough to know that poems are entirely welcome and also completely optional, helps by labeling baskets with quiet metaphors. One reads, sunset caught in wool. Another, the sweet spot between grievance and song. The labels are not necessary, but they keep visiting gods well behaved. A deity with a metaphor in hand is less likely to tip a basket. When he gets chatty, Idun nods as if new information has occurred. She loves him, and also she wears the expression of someone balancing a tray that is already full enough. Sometimes he offers to sing the apples to sleep. They are very good at pretending to fall asleep quickly so he can. Apples make excellent audiences for bedtime epics. Being round and susceptible to rhythm, Idun rotates the basket softly like planets. A quarter turn after the second knot of the rope, and again after the fourth. This keeps the weight even and the dreams distributed. Apples are heavy dreamers. They prefer themes of steadiness, ladders, and the sound of rain deciding to be gentle. She hums a little accident of a tune that keeps her hands at the same speed as her thoughts. The room hums back in wood and stone. Mice are not a problem, because mice do not become immortal, and therefore do not understand the investment. A cat does visit an elderly gray ambition with one good ear and a contrary tail. He takes his wages in warmth. Goddesses who guard the renewal of all things are known to indulge cats that will not sit where they are placed. It keeps the infinite honest dot. People imagine the apples as shining like coins all the time, but most of their shine is the kind that only diligent cloth reveals. Idun polishes with thin linen saved from gowns that have retired from formal prophecy. The cloth learns to be small, which is a talent in heaven. Each polish is a conversation. She encourages the skin to seal, praises the blush for arriving politely, and apologizes to the stem when it comes off in her fingers. Stems detaching are not failure. They are a reminder that even immortality thinks about letting go. She collects those stems in a jar, the color of story water. On evenings when the jar is full, she braids them into a ring that Bragi claims makes ideas ripen. He wears it when composing and pretends the improvement is all his dot. There is a borrowing system because gods have days. Odin has wanderer days, meddling days, and broad strategy days that smell like bay leaves. On wanderer days, he appears with his hat performing privacy, takes an apple with 2 fingers as if pinching a thought, and murmurs something about field testing. He insists he can tell the difference between apples from trees that listen to poetry and apples from trees that listen to wind. Idun smiles. Of course he can. She logs the loan with a mark, shaped like a tiny spear, next to the inventory number. There's never a due date written, only the phrase, when the story is done. The stories are rarely done, so returns happen at odd hours. A raven will arrive with an apple in its beak, set it down with the carefulness of a coin, and leave a dark feather like a receipt. Ravens are polite when they remember. When they don't, Idun has a tin of shiny buttons. These purchase their attention. It is not a bribe. It is a negotiation with an aesthetic. Free stops by with a basket of petals that prefer to be useful. She trades for apples that understand love from the angle of maintenance rather than the angle of heat. Those apples are placed in dishes near doorways so people remember not to step over one another's promises. Tyr, who knows the weight of choices, likes the small apples that taste like saying exactly what you meant. He eats them with both hands as if to show fairness. Loki, when he visits, threatens to be charming at the inventory, but manages to be only almost charming. Idun gives him an apple from the shelf of moral lessons, and a look that means, please try not to bend this one into a riddle. He does anyway. Apples that go with Loki are quarantined twice on return, just in case they learn tricks. The cellar also contains a workbench, because apples are not a single-task fruit. Idun makes cordials. She allows the juice to settle in a tall glass where time can see it. She arranges herbs like a council, a stern council but fair. A pinch of meadowsweet, a whisper of juniper, a courteous number of rose hips that keep everyone eloquent but not cruel. The bottles become a small constellation on a high shelf for nights when the gods need the kind of courage that does not stomp. She also dries slices for the huntsman who returns, smelling like the part of winter that tries to audition for spring. For them, she packs thin bites laced with honey and salt. It is not obvious, but immortal stamina appreciates good snacks. Now and then mortals appear at the edge of the orchard in dreams, pale as old paper, asking if their grandmother's recipe used apples like these. Idun answers with fragments, a temperature described as where you can hold your hand near the pot and not hate it. A stirring direction described as sunwise. A reminder that cinnamon is a cousin and behaves better when treated as such. She does not give out immortality. She gives out afternoons. Most people are relieved. Immortality would ruin their errands, and errands, again, are how the world stays lovable. She keeps a small stool by the window for thinking about weather. Weather matters to the apples even indoors, because the skins like to know what sort of poem the sky is trying. She writes 2-line notes, fog like a cat's idea of ethics. Wind from the north behaving itself. Rain trying to be important, not succeeding. On very clear nights, she balances an apple on the windowsill so starlight can practice aiming at good targets. The next day, that apple is invariably persuasive without being loud. Gods take it to meetings. The cellar has a night visitor who never says hello. Sleep, doing rounds, checking people for compliance. Sleep looks in on Idun and nods, because she is already calibrated to the steady tasks that lull thought into gratitude. She wipes the workbench with a damp cloth like a lake at ease. She ties the linen bag of flawed apples for stew and marks it with a dot shaped like forgiveness. She counts baskets by touch once more, a soft accounting that is more blessing than audit. Somewhere upstairs, Bragi is trying a line with too many syllables and will return to remove 3. He brings down a blanket without being asked because long marriages are teaching assistants to magic. Idun situates the blanket on the stool for the cat, who refuses it as cats must, before accepting another microfact. The cellar's clock is a drip basin under a slow pipe. If the drip is regular, the cool stays honest. If the drip fusses, something is untrue about the stone. She adjusts the basin with 2 fingers and calls the mountain friend until it behaves. She also listens for the faintest creak from the rafters that means the wood would like some beeswax on its old joints. The wood is a character, dependable, a tiny bit vain. She obliges with the cloth. Satisfied wood is quiet wood. Quiet wood escorts sleep. There are records of harvests going back centuries because Idun keeps history like a grandmother keeps buttons. more than necessary, non-identical, all claim to be useful. In the margins, she has drawn condensed weather maps made of arrows and little whiskers that represent opinions. She can trace a particularly kind year by how round her handwriting becomes. The year Thor pretended not to cry at a wedding, she wrote so gently that the chalk became soft. The winter Odin didn't come home for a long while. Her letters developed shoulders. She doesn't show these pages to anyone. They are the diary of how fruit supervised the mighty. Toward the kindest part of night, she steps outside to the orchard, carrying an empty basket because hands feel better when they are practicing. The trees are asleep, arms raised like dancers holding a long note. She loosens the soil around one young trunk with a fork, a quiet nudge that roots appreciate the way people appreciate chairs pulled out for them. The ground answers with a smell like patient sugar. Somewhere far off, a fox considers being seen and decides against it. Idun's feet know the path. The path knows the temperature of her feet. In the north, companionship is sometimes just this: a person and a walkway agreeing not to surprise one another. Back in the cellar, she does the only dangerous thing she allows herself. She plans slightly. She imagines where each basket will go tomorrow. Which god will need an apple that tastes like, remember the middle of a conversation? Which mortal will dream themselves to the orchard fence with a question about when to add salt? She thinks about a juice that will make courage less sticky. She wonders if a rind of cheese left too near the apples will become accidentally wise. She writes experiment on a scrap and tucks it under a small stone that has been promoted to paperweight. Nothing wild, just the curiosity that keeps immortal rooms from turning into museums. Dot in a different corner. There's a crate with a history carved on its side. It records the time a frost came too soon, turned the orchard into glass, and everyone promised to learn the difference between rescue and fuss. Idun kept the door wide then so the sky could apologize. The sky does that sometimes wordlessly in the shape of a better tomorrow. She carved a single little line for that apology, and it is still there, shiny from years of being touched absent-mindedly while people made up stories about endurance. The crate remains functional. History and joy is also being useful. Occasionally, apples volunteer for other tasks. One rolls to the hem of the world to keep it from dragging in the snow. Another is set in a child's palm to practice gentle strength. A third becomes a stamp for dough, pressing a pentacle of seeds into rounds of bread that rise as if cheered from below. So many uses for circles. Idun lets them go and makes a note that her counting has once again outnumbered itself. Arithmetic loves a good wander. Dot at some last, soft hour. She sits on the stool with the blanket she does not need, closes her eyes, and listens to the cellar do its small music. Drip, thread, feather, cat. It's the orchestra one hires when one prefers to think. If you've made it here with your eyes still open, you're doing better than Bifrost's guard during a lull. You can subscribe to the idea of apples being managed while you sleep, which is really what subscription means at this hour. Or you can let the inventory continue without you, because Idun's chalk is steady whether or not you're keeping score. The rope's last knot brushes. Her knuckle. Time for one more rotation. One more look down the list. One more kindness performed on purpose. The room is proof that eternity is just many polite evenings in a row. She lowers the lamp. The darkness settles like a shawl designed by an ant who understands shoulders. The apples go on being spheres of patient dawn. The door to the cellar remembers how to close itself without complaint. Somewhere an old branch sighs. Idun leaves the room as she found it, only more prepared to be exactly itself. It will go on like this, night after night, the quiet craft hidden inside the grand story. A little colder than comfort and exactly as warm as care, adding up to forever, which never raises its voice and always smells faintly of mint and wood, and the inside of a thoughtful sleeve.